All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's pre-lock show where we are here to go game by game, kind of show you some guys I like, some sneaky plays, but there's also some chalk that I think is pretty solid, especially after some of the recent news we got. But it's a 7-game slate. I don't want to waste too much time. But first things first, we have to look at yesterday's slate, talk through how that went. For me, it was not the best, but you'll see when we look at the 50K winning lineup, we had a lot of the plays right. I just didn't have the right combination. And then I also didn't have any Giannis. And so that just kind of took me out of the running. But we had quite a few DFS Army members do well last night. So obviously, just because I don't do well doesn't mean that everyone else can't. Carlton Carrington, he was in the nuts line. He was someone that we mentioned on the show. Both B-Dubs and we weren't like overly excited about him going up against the Magic, but he was showing up, for me at least, over the field. Shaden Sharp was someone that was very chalky. We all had plenty of exposure to. He was in the line. Jalen Wells at 6%. He snuck in there. I don't recall being on him, but, he definitely did well last night against Miami. Giannis showed the ceiling that we all knew he had in a soft matchup, so it was nice to see him do that, even though I didn't have him. Looks like he's getting into some better form going into the playoffs, but also it was the Sixers, so not the biggest surprise in the world. Zach Edey snuck his way in the nuts line. He wasn't really fantastic, but at 4,500, he did enough. Banton, he ended up being a core play. He was in plenty of lines. Denny Avdia, he was in there. Orlando Robinson, he was a guy that I liked, especially going up against Toronto, but didn't have enough of him at the end of the day, to be honest. And then Marcus Smart, he wasn't in the nuts line, but he was someone that surprised us to start yesterday, but he didn't do jack shit while he was out there. So he was a bit of a disappointment for me. But we have a 7-game slate today. I like it in a gross way. And like we said on, was it Wednesday or Thursday? I don't know. It was definitely Wednesday. Even though we don't like these slates, it doesn't mean we can't make money on them, because Wednesday was a good one, and hopefully we can repeat, even though we have a lot of wide spreads. Starting off, Cedric, good to see you, man. Appreciate you for sticking with me on a Friday. We have the Utah Jazz going up against the Indiana Pacers. The Jazz have basically given up on the season from an injury perspective. They have Walker Kessler out, KJ Martin out. Those are really the only two pieces that matter at this point. I had a like on these Jazz players, but I didn't care enough about them to force exposure. Oscar Tshiebwe, I can't say his name. He's showing up in about 16% of my lines. Bryce Sensabaugh showing up in about 7%, and Isaiah Collier showing up in only 1% of them. This game is the second highest total game on the slate. You can't trust these Jazz players, but I do want to make sure, at least for some of these cheap players that should still see plenty of run tonight, I want to have some exposure. So I'll put a 17% min on Bryce, 8% min on Sexton, 11% on Collier, and 4% on George. And I guess I'm fine with a 10% min on Filipowski. Second highest total game. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to force some exposure here. So, decent spot, but there's other plays I like significantly more on this slate. The Pacers side of things, you're going to hear this a lot. Fantastic spot, fantastic matchup. The only concern here is the blowout concern. There's a 17-point spread here. They should crush the Jazz tonight, and the Jazz should be done pretty early. So, guys like Halliburton, Turner, they're not safe plays by any means just because of the high likelihood of a blowout. But I say it all the time, I don't play for blowouts. We saw Bridges on Monday crush a team that they were supposed to get blown out by in like the third quarter. So for me, I'm not going to overthink it. I have a 28% min. I'm going to increase that. 28% min on Halliburton just because it's a soft matchup. He's not going to show up for me, he's not going to be a core player or anything. Right now, he's showing up at about 37% of my lines, which for me is pretty appropriate. Slightly over the field, a little bit of an edge, but nothing too crazy, knowing the risk that is involved with the potential blowout. Miles Turner, I like a good bit. The Jazz are just really bad against bigs. Siakam is going to play, so he's viable. I just like Halliburton and Turner a bit more. So I have a 25% min on Turner, giving me a little bit of, actually a decent amount of edge over the field on him. In that soft matchup against the Jazz, this is something that we do pretty often, just taking a shot on a relatively low owned Turner on a 7-game slate. And then Nesmith was just someone who stood out for me in the sim model. In a soft matchup, I'm always more willing to take a shot on guys like Mathurin, Nimbard, and Nesmith. Nesmith was just the one that stood out for me today in the sim. All right, this next Kings game is a little gross. Lowest total game on the slate. These are two teams that I never really enjoy seeing, but there's still some guys that stand out here. Domantas Sabonis, he's questionable. If he gets ruled out, Joval is going to end up being pretty chalky on this slate. I would be a lot more interested in playing a guy like DeMar DeRozan in a relatively soft matchup against the Hornets. But at this point, if they all play, just given the widespread, low total environment, I'm not overly excited about the pay-up options if they're all healthy. Keegan Murray, I do like enough at 6,100. He's been good lately. We've been hitting on him relatively consistently. Just because it happened in the past doesn't mean it will continue to happen. But as long as he's going to be relatively low owned, I like forcing exposure here, especially if Sabonis gets ruled out. He's someone I want to make sure I don't forget about as well. So I have a 3% min on him there. And then the sim liked Malik Monk. That's why I have a like on him. I'm going to leave the like because as soon as I take the like off of these guys, we've seen it multiple times this week, they end up being the guy that goes off. I don't like Malik Monk enough to force exposure to him, but if me increasing his projection by a little bit is going to make him show up in a couple of times or a couple of lines, I'm not going to over tinker that one with the sim liking him. And then as of right now, none of the Kings are showing up, but I will have 3% Keegan Murray. Tough spot, if you can't tell. It makes me a little nervous not having more exposure there, but nothing really points to these guys tonight. Next up, we have one of my favorite leverage plays on the slate. The Hornets are missing quite a few of their studs. We just got the news that Mark Williams is going to be ruled out for this game, so it is ugly for Charlotte. The likelihood of the blowout is relatively high for the Kings, especially if they're healthy. If Sabonis plays, I am going to force exposure to him. We will get that news in time. The matchup is just too easy for him here. And so that's why I'm going to force exposure to Sabonis if we get that news or when we get that news. And then on the Hornet side of things, KJ Simpson is going to be a leverage play for me. He's been in good form. I've been playing him. We've been playing him a decent amount so far. There are better value options from some of the games we'll get to in a little bit. But just given the price tag, given the low ownership, he's just someone I wanted to solidify some exposure to. His ownership is going down, so I don't need 15%. That's getting probably a little too cute, but I think anywhere from like 10 to 15% is appropriate and something that I'm doing on this slate. All right, let's see. What's up, JM? Good to see you, man. Appreciate it. Nurkic is viable. The minutes inconsistency is really my biggest concern. If Sabonis plays, I'm a little bit more tempted to take a shot on Nurkic. I think they'll just need his size more. If Sabonis doesn't play, I am not going to force Nurkic in. But again, projections will continue to update as we get closer to lock. And so if he starts to show up a bit more naturally, like we see sometimes as we get closer to lock, we'll see the DS change a little bit from a projection standpoint. I'm not going to be against it. Next game, Suns going up against the Celtics. You would think with Kevin Durant out, we would be a little bit more interested in the Suns today, but Bradley Beal is also returning after being out for a while. And so guys like Gillespie, who has been solid, is just a lot less viable with Beal returning tonight. And even Booker and Beal in a tough matchup against the Celtics is not the craziest dart throw in the world, but it is quite literally a dart throw. There's nothing really that will point towards playing these guys outside of low ownership and a decent game environment. But that's really just a lot better for the Celtics, not as much the Suns. But you're not crazy if you take a shot on Booker. The Celtics side is a lot more interesting to me. I'm going to force exposure to Tatum here. Just a soft matchup against the Suns. We know they're not a good defensive team. The concern is the blowout risk. They should run away with this game. The Suns shouldn't be able to keep it close at all here. But I don't play for blowouts. It's still a good game environment. It's a pace-up spot for them, and he's going up against a bad matchup or a bad defense. So I'm going to put a 5% min on Tatum just to make sure I have him in the mix. Kristaps Porzingis is going to be a pre-lock show leverage play for me. Jaylen Brown's questionable. If he gets ruled out, we're going to take significantly more shots on this Celtics team. Guys like White, Holiday, Pritchard, Horford typically starts in that spot. Would all just see a nice boost and would become more viable plays for me. But assuming Brown plays tonight, I'm really only looking at a little bit of Tatum and a little bit of Porzingis and getting a little bit of leverage on Porzingis at really low ownership. And like, who on the Suns can stop him? Not like Porzingis is a world beater or anything, but the Suns have jack shit when it comes to bigs right now. So really soft matchup for Porzy. All right. The Pistons going up against the Raptors. The Pistons, the biggest thing we have to worry about here is Cade Cunningham being questionable. If Cade's out, we're playing the Pistons tonight. A lot of really strong plays here in that scenario. If Cade plays, guys like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway, Dennis Schroeder, guys who would be a bit more viable, are just really hard to look at. But we're going to wait until the news comes. I'm not going to try and react to it or predict it because just with the way the slate breaks out from like a timing standpoint, we should have most of this news by the time we get to lock. So it's not one of those things we have to hyper focus on too much. I have a 5% min on Asar Thompson. At low ownership, even if Cade plays, it's a soft enough matchup and a decent enough game environment with a 226.5 total that I still like having enforcing some exposure here to these low-owned guys we know can be explosive. Like I said, clearly better plays if Cade's out, but we can only take what we have right now. I have a 3% min on Malik Beasley. Obviously a very volatile player, but again, in a soft matchup, seeing plenty of minutes, I like forcing a little bit of exposure to him, especially at a position where a lot of people are going to be paying down at today for good reason. And then I have a like on Paul Reed. He just stood out for me in the sim model. His minutes are inconsistent as all hell, but he's shown some signs of life here recently. At that $3,600 price tag in a soft matchup, he's far from like the worst play on the slate. He's currently showing up in 46% of my lines. Let me look a little bit closer at this. I don't know if I want that much Paul Reed. I get it from like a value perspective, but I don't trust that guy. Okay. Detroit. Detroit. I know Isaiah Stewart's been out, but he's still not seeing a ton of minutes. He's more efficient with his minutes recently in that OKC game, but he still only saw 14 minutes. We have him projected for 18. I don't want to go over 40. He could crush tonight, but I'm just going to limit how much he can hurt me tonight. Let me look at the field a little bit, look at ownership. Yeah, it looks like 40% should be pretty solid. So I'm going to cap him at 40, and that way just limit how much he can hurt me tonight if he ends up not seeing as many minutes as we have him projected for. Keon, let me see. $4,800. Matchup's not terrible. It's just a low total game. And I do just think there's better plays on the slate, especially at point guard and shooting guard. And we'll get to some of them as we get to the next game. So for the Raptors tonight, we got the news that Scotty Barnes is out. That was awesome. And because of that, we have a lot of strong plays. The concern here is that the Pistons aren't a bad defense. They're not a soft matchup, but these guys are so cheap. And we saw what Orlando Robinson did yesterday. They're just much more viable plays. Their usage rates go up, and so they're just players I want exposure to. So Orlando Robinson, I have an 8% min on. I don't plan on changing that. Well, I'll boost it a little bit to maybe like 15%, just trying to force in that value center play because we don't have the best value. We just have some guys who have shown some upside at a cheap price tag. So I'm comfortable mixing him in. And then Mogbo is someone who should show up a bit more for you naturally. I had a 10% min on him, but we're going to need a little bit more than that tonight at 3,900 and without Scotty Barnes. There's some more guys I like from the Raptors tonight that I'm going to force exposure to, but I want to at least get that run going. Okay. And then Emmanuel Quickly, we talk about him quite often, but when Scotty Barnes is out, this is Quickly's team that he runs point on. And so I'm going to put a 3% min on Quickly. I doubt he's going to see a ton of exposure or ownership. Actually, I'll increase it to like 6%. He's still not going to be super high owned just because of the tough matchup, and he's not a value play anymore, but I still like having exposure to him. We know he has 40, 50 point upside, even in these tough matchups. Game environment is decent. If they can keep it close, helps a lot if Cade is out. So I might not. Yeah, I'll keep the 6% min for now, but if Cade ends up playing, I'll consider taking it off just due to the increased likelihood of the game blowing out in that scenario. And then guys like Sheed and Walter are very viable once again. And I want to see these guys show up a bit more by themselves, but if they don't, I am willing to force it. At 4,400, Walter's helped us a lot this week already. I'm going to go ahead and put an 8, maybe I'll just do like a 20% min, force him in there. And then Sheed isn't as much of a priority for me. Just given the role he typically plays on this team, I like Quickly a bit more there. But I would like to see him show up a little bit. His minutes just aren't as consistent as the rest of this team at his slightly higher price tag. But let me look a little bit closer at some of his game history and see if I'm missing anything here. 35, 32 point upside. A lot of those were soft matchups against like Philly, Charlotte. Brooklyn was a little tough. Spurs he did well against. He had 31 against Brooklyn. Yeah, I'm comfortable forcing exposure to Sheed. He shouldn't be this low owned. And it looks like the rest of the field and market they aren't really showing him a lot of love either. So I'll put like a 3% min on him just to make sure he's showing up a little bit for me. And then Battle and Lawson, if they don't show up by themselves, Lawson's showing up in about 2% of my lines. Battle, looks like his ownership jumped to 20%. I like to match the field on these cheap guys just to make sure that if they do go off, I have exposure. So he's not showing up right now for me in the DS. For a lot of y'all, hopefully he will. If you don't like the force mins, but I'm going to put a 20% min on him just to make sure he's showing up a bit more for me. And I'll check some of the field, make sure they are also still high on Battle. And they are. They're actually a little bit higher. So I'll increase him to like 26% just to make sure I'm a little bit over the field there. Again, these cheap players, I don't really care if they don't come through for me because they're so cheap. I'm not going to overthink it. And then Lawson, we will force a little bit of exposure to. I'll put a 10% min on him at 3,300. So yeah, the Raptors are in play tonight, and actually looks like ownership is starting to come through for some of these guys. So I'll put a 13% min on Sheed. Not as sneaky as I was hoping he was going to be, unfortunately. Binkin, what's up? What's up? B-Dub said, Nurk and KJ should be popping now on your next refresh. Damn it. I wanted KJ to be a leverage play. Hopefully ownership isn't popping on KJ too much. But Nurkic, I get. He makes a ton of sense here. So hopefully we'll do a quick refresh. See these guys show up a little bit more for me, and we'll be good. What's up, Binkin? Good to see you, man. Okay. Back at it. We'll do a look through at exposures as we get towards the end of the show. So no worries, guys. We'll get it all wrapped up. Next up, we have maybe my favorite game on the slate. We have the Portland Trailblazers going up against the Chicago Bulls. Yeah, that sounded gross to say for me too. But we got the news that we're actually still waiting on the Simons news. That sucks. Right? Let me make sure I didn't miss it. We got a lot of news at one time. Portland. Yeah, Simons is still questionable. That's a little annoying just because we know if he's out what these guys can do. Denny Avdia, we are not getting him at a discount anymore. He's 9,400. He's clearly a much better, safer play if Simons is out. And Kamara is questionable as well. He plays a lot of minutes, so still carries some weight. A lot of the guys that would benefit if he's out are some of the guys that we don't typically play in these scenarios, like Murray, Walker, are guys that stand out for me. Thibault would be a bit more interesting there too. He's such a low usage guy, though. I don't get overly excited about that. But if Kamara's out, I would still take a shot on Thibault. But for now, we have Simon showing up as a core play. He didn't play last night, so I do feel like he should play tonight. Denny Avdia showing up in 61% of my lines. He's one of those players that if Simons plays, I'm considering just matching the field on him, maybe putting like a 30% max on. Just because of his price tag, I like him significantly less. The matchup is fantastic. We know he has upside for all days, even when Simons plays. I just don't like him as much as a core play if Simons ends up playing tonight. Who else? Sharp is showing up in about 8% of my lines. I'm not going to tinker with that right now just because of some of the other plays we've gotten. And again, if Simons plays, I'm not as gung-ho about forcing these guys in, even though I do like picking on the Bulls. And Klingon as well is a fine center play. I just think we have better options. He's not showing up for me naturally right now, and I don't care enough to force exposure to it. B-Dub, appreciate that. Heads up. And then Bless16 said got Banton now, but if Simons is in, move off him to KJ. Yeah, I mean, the tough part is you just have to get that Simons news in time because the Hornets game locks in at 7. So you just got to be careful with that. Yeah, I'm going to have to... Nurkic still isn't showing up too much for me, so I might have to force him in. Oh, no, he is. Okay, Nurkic is in 95% of my lines, and then KJ Simpson is showing up where he should be in 20% of my lines. So still leverage play. No worries, man. Appreciate you. JM said, hey, I just noticed that the main slate for FanDuel is different. Can you go over those games if we have time, JM? I don't know if we will. Darius said, yo, Bob, it's always good to see you live. It's time for you to bring our pockets to the promised land. I hope so. Let's make it happen, man. Oh, Jay Koch, good to see you, man. Yeah. Caution, I'm really butchering your username, but I've seen you in the Discord, man. Appreciate you joining the show. Let's see here. All right. So Portland's a team we got to keep a close eye out for due to news. The Bulls are a team I like at low ownership. And these guys, their ownership there no signs of it going up at this point, which I love. The Portland Trailblazers are not a good defensive team. The spread is getting closer. 5 points. We don't really have that on this slate outside of 2 really good defensive teams. And so this is a spot I want to force exposure to. Giddey is a leverage play for me tonight. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. His ownership is only going down just because there's some other options that have started to pop for other guys, but he still stands out a lot for me. Vucevic, I'm always taking shots on this guy. He's been disappointing us a lot lately, but in a soft matchup, low ownership, good game environment, should stay close, I'm playing him. Buzelis, similar situation, looking for guys who are playing a lot of minutes in this soft matchup. As long as the game, honestly, he should be fine even if the game doesn't stay competitive. I like it. I think that's it, Darius. I think that's why his ownership is going lower. People are like, he's 9,900. But if you look at the pay up options on this slate, it doesn't really get better. Like there's SGA, there's Tatum, and then there's everybody else. It gets gross really fast, and so I like taking shots on guys like Giddey here. And so yeah, I like the Bulls a decent amount over the field on 2 out of the 3 guys. You can consider Kobe White. He just hasn't had as much usage as guys like Giddey and Vucevic, and he's not priced like Buzelis or Herter, so it's hard for me to get there. All right, next up we have my actual favorite game of the slate, which also still sounds really gross. But the Cavs have the softest matchup in the NBA tonight, have the highest total game. The biggest concern is, like a lot of these games, the spread. And again, I don't really play for blowouts. It's really hard to predict blowouts in the NBA. Granted, the Spurs have jack shit to play for, so they should just let this game be a blowout. But just in case it's not, the fantastic matchup and low-ish ownership on these guys is enough of a reason for me to play them. So I have a 25% min on Mitchell. I'm going to lower that to a 20% min. Highest total game on the slate, finding reasons to play these guys, not reasons not to. So I'm going to keep the 25% min on Mitchell, give myself a little bit of an edge over the field if he goes off. Again, there's not a ton of pay-up options that even have like a decent floor. So I don't feel that gross focusing exposure on Mitchell in a soft matchup. The tough part is all of the Cavs have a soft matchup tonight. And so it's hard to kind of figure out who's going to be that guy or the 2 guys who really go off here. But I'm going to force exposure to Mitchell, be over the field. I'm going to match field exposure on Mobley. 8,800, a little bit easier to get to, a little bit lower owned too. So I like him as a play tonight in the highest total game. And then Jared Allen is going to be a leverage play for me tonight. Super soft matchup, low owned. He's the most volatile guy out of like their core 4 of guys who see decent usage. But that's why he's the lowest owned. And especially in games where there's a higher risk of blowout, I like taking shots on the cheap guy who has just as much upside as everyone else, but he doesn't have to do as much to get there, just in case it does get gross. So I have an 18% min on him. Let's see how much these guys are actually showing up in my lines. Donovan Mitchell's at 29%. Comfortable with that. Jared Allen, 18%. And then Mobley right at 16 as well. This Spurs team is gross. Like, the only reason I'm playing them is because of the high total. It's not a good matchup for them. Is really bad, actually, for all of them. We know the Cavs are a good defensive team. Sabonis is available, so we don't have to worry about that situation as much anymore. But Castle, I have a 15% min on. We know how explosive he can be, even in tough matchups, so he's a guy I just wanted to force exposure to. Keldon Johnson, 15% min on. I capped Chris Paul at 60%. He's not showing up quite as much for me anymore, probably because of the cap I put on him. He's only showing up in about 9% of my lines, and I'm never excited to play a 40-year-old towards the end of the season when they have nothing to play for. We have him projected for 28 minutes. It would be awesome if he gets that. He'll come through and crush. He's been decent so far towards the end of the season, but especially in these bad matchups that have a high blowout potential, I don't need 60, 70, 80% of a guy like that. I would much rather be closer to field weight exposure, 20, 25%, if anything. But obviously, I'm under the field right now. And then Sandro Mamu, he was showing up in a few of my lines. Oh, shit. Denny Avdia is now listed as questionable. Cade Cunningham is out. That's why I'm glad we do the show when we do, because it gives us a little bit more time to kind of talk through some of these guys, but it's crazy. It's crazy. But Mamu was showing up in pretty much all of my lines earlier today. I had to cap him. We know how awesome he can be in really good spots. And I'm going to take the cap off. And let me make sure I want to be like pretty close to field weight exposure. So I'll put like a 15, 17% min on him just to make sure I'm close to field weight exposure. Because we know he still has a ton of upside at this price tag. It's just sometimes he doesn't see a lot of run. I think he will be needed just in this matchup because of how big the Cavs are. So his floor is a little bit safer than it typically is, but I didn't want him in 88% of my lines. He's more of like I said, 15 to 25% guy for me tonight. So we'll put that 17% min there, 15% min on Keldon Johnson. Biyombo, I'm starting to get a bit more lukewarm on. I don't think I need the 8% min. At 3,200, him seeing 28 minutes is just crazy. He doesn't typically do a lot while he's out there. But if there's foul trouble tonight, or if this game stays competitive, they need all the bigs they can have out there. So I'll keep we have him at 3% ownership. I'll be slightly over the field at 5, just to make sure I have him in the mix of value options. Let's see, are any other Spurs sneaking in here? Nah. All right. We're good here. Cool. I'll do one more run before we go to the last game. And it's the hammer game. Not literally, but with the layout of the DS, it's the hammer game. We have, again, the second closest spread on the slate. 2 good defensive teams, but the total's still solid at 227.5. I'm forcing exposure to the studs here. It's gross. Matchup isn't great, but just the lack of floor for pay-up options on this slate for me, it made sense to force some exposure to these guys that we know can be explosive, especially SGA, who has shown time and time again, it really doesn't matter for him what the matchup is. So it looks like his ownership has increased a bit, so I'll put a 12% min on him there. I have a 10% min on Jalen Williams, Jalen, and that's going to be it for me. I don't love the Thunder tonight. They're not going to show up by themselves. If you want to take a shot along with me, you're going to have to force them in some way, whether it be a min or a projection. Raptors are a similar story. We know how good this Thunder defense is. They're relatively healthy. I know Dylan Brooks is out, but, it's Dylan Brooks. That's really just a boost to Eason. The matchup is tough, but everyone's priced. Once you get past Jalen Green, they're priced decently. Well, they're not too expensive, but given some of the recent prediction, still a little pricey. I'm going to put a 5% min on Jalen Green. Sim model liked him a little bit. I don't love the matchup or the price tag, but again, in a close game, hard to find those on this slate, so want some exposure to it. Fred VanVleet's been god-awful, but Sim liked him a little. And the ownership is just kind of requiring me to play him at this point, so I have a 10% min there. Let me also look at some of the field and just make sure I'm still not too over on this. Okay, so maybe I'll lower Fred VanVleet to like 7%. Eason should still have decent ownership. Yeah, we have him at like 15. I'll keep like a 16% min on him. And then Jabari Smith was also just like a pure sim model play. So I don't want to go too crazy on guys like that. I'll be closer to I'll put a 5% min on Jabari. Just guys who have shown signs of upside, even in tough matchups. I felt like I needed to force some exposure here tonight. Single entry, I don't really plan on getting too much exposure to this game unless it's with like a SGA or someone like that. But for the most part, I'm looking at attacking with like the Cavs, the Bulls, Portland, Raptors, and now let's look at the Pistons. So with Cade Cunningham out, these guys become significantly much more viable and just good plays on this slate. But before we get there, let's see what are all. Okay, no one had any questions, so we're good to go there. Let's see. For Detroit. We haven't updated their projections yet, so of course, I always think it's a good idea to wait for the projections, kind of see what happens and plays out there. But with that being said, without Cade, I'm less worried about Paul Reed just because it increases his likelihood of just being more involved in the offense. So I'm willing to increase his max to about 50. I still don't want him as a core play tonight, but I'm okay with his floor now. Malik Beasley's going to show up in more of our lines naturally. Schroeder should show up a bit more naturally, as should Asar Thompson. All these guys are just really strong plays on this slate, especially with Tobias Harris out still as well. Jalen Duren could get a little sneaky. I want to see what his ownership increases to. Because if he ends up being super chalk, I don't really care to match the field unless the DS just throws him in. But if he stays around like 8-9% ownership, I'm willing to get like 15-ish, maybe a little bit higher. So those are the guys I'm looking out for. We'll see if there's any more questions, but if we have a couple, I might go back and look at him. And then I know my guy JM wanted us to look at FanDuel right quick. I'll try and look at these guys. The games that I would look to target are like the later ones here. So Nuggets, Warriors, Mavs, Clippers. The Pelicans-Lakers game gets a little gross. You're not seeing as much ownership here, but of course, you can never really go wrong with taking a shot on Luka or LeBron. Jose Alvarado's a solid value option. I wouldn't try and avoid him. We know the Lakers are struggling defensively, even though the Warriors did struggle the other night. But Jose Alvarado is fine. I wouldn't love maybe like any more than 70%. I don't know how much he's showing up in the DS, but we know he's not the most consistent player. So I wouldn't go too crazy there. So don't love that game. AD is questionable, but if he plays, I think this could be a solid spot for him at low ownership. Someone I would look at considering. Zubac is fine as well. Very comfortable playing bigs against the Mavs. Harden, Kawhi, don't really stand out for me too much, but I wouldn't do anything to stop them if the DS is on them. Obviously, I think Jokic is a little low owned, especially with some of the value we have. I would make sure he's showing up in my lines. The Warriors are hard to look at right now because they have a ton of guys questionable, so that will really dictate what we do. Of course, Jamal Murray being questionable too will impact some things, but it's more of a, for me, just play Jokic and then wait and see what happens with the Warrior news. Yeah, interesting slate on FanDuel. Too many games, though. I'm never a big fan of those larger slates. No worries, JM. No worries. All right, let's do one more run. Look at exposures. Make sure we're still liking how things are looking, and then we'll be good to go. Refresh. Let me see if we have had a chance to update the... Blanking on what team was it? Raptors? Nope. Pistons. There we go. Looks like we might have. No, we definitely haven't. Okay. That will still come significantly before lock, so I'm not really overly concerned about that situation quite yet. Let's see what we get. All right, 114. Okay. So we have Nurkic as a core play, Mogbo as a core play right now. Again, a lot of this will change with some of the Pistons coming in. Simons, we're still waiting on that news. I'm fine with it for now. Avdia, I don't want to over-tinker with yet as we're waiting for that news. Halliburton's showing up a good bit. Giddey's showing up a lot. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. Mitchell over the field. Battle over the field. Turner over the field. Simpson, same thing. Walter right at field weight. Mamu, same story. Allen, leverage play. Bryce, Mobley. And what I do here is really just making sure there's not anyone I'm missing. I'm not seeing anyone show up more than I like them at. Just making sure it's the way I want it to be for the slate. Okay. And yeah. So basically what I will do just kind of up until lock is just refresh and then wait for the DS to update the Pistons news and just make sure we're not waiting on any other news. So that's pretty much is going to be it for me. James said, Simons is 6,300. If he is out, who do I pivot to at the shooting guard spot on FanDuel? Let's see. I'm going to pull up FanDuel on another screen just so I don't have to go back through it. All right, here we go. FanDuel. Make sure we have all games here. Shooting guard. Simon, 6,300. So the interesting thing here is you really don't have to overthink it too much yet, because if Simons gets ruled out, and I don't know if we would get the Warriors news in time, but if Steph and crew end up getting ruled out, Podziemski would be a very solid play here. He's still fine. He's just not as strong of a play as Simons is if he plays. But if Curry or Butler or some of those guys end up getting ruled out, you're going to want some exposure to Podziemski here. And who else would be viable? Malik Beasley is going to pop. And honestly, I would want to wait and see for projections and make sure he projects better than Simons, but I expect he would. You could make that pivot to Malik Beasley. I don't think we have to get to Tim Hardaway, but we've done worse. I do probably want to make sure Tim Hardaway's in a few of my lines, but for you, JM, Malik Beasley could be another solid just pay down option for you in the mid range, and then you could maybe pay up at another position. The tough part is we just don't have a lot of pay up studs. Like, we'll look at him. I mean, Jokic is great, and you do have more options on FanDuel. Don't Lucas seeing some ownership? Let me look at the sim for FanDuel right quick. Or maybe it's all in one now. Yeah, it is. So, like, yeah, Jokic is really good over there. Giddy, you can see why I like him. Harden is not great. I like Davis if you can get to him. Maybe with like those pay down options. Even Curry or Kawhi could be viable. I actually like Kawhi and Curry a good bit if Curry plays. I didn't mention Kawhi. I didn't realize the sim liked him as much, but it makes a lot of sense against a really bad Dallas defense. That's actually a really good call out. What's his ownership? He's low owned. I might play on FanDuel. No, okay, he's 13%, so he's not that sneaky. But yeah, those are some potential options. But let's wait and see what happens first with like the projections. But that's pretty much it for me, y'all. I will see you all on Monday. I know the rest of the crew, the coaches, will be in the Discord answering questions. I will be for a little bit as well before I head out. But I hope everyone has a good night tonight, and hopefully we're celebrating. Peace out, y'all.